Hello, I'm Bob the Bookerer and welcome to my channel, and today I just wanted to talk a bit about the books that I've been reading this week. As you can see, I'm still with dog. That does make it sound like I'm pregnant with a dog. You know what I mean? I'm still with the dog, but it's my last little day with him. So we'll be back to normal-ish for next week. Anyway, here are some of the books I've been reading this week, and there are a few Booker ones in here as well that I'll probably quickly touch on, but they'll have their own solo reviews. Obviously, with it being Booker season, that's kind of what a lot of my reading is sort of becoming. So yeah, just as a sort of heads up that there will be a few in here as well, but again, no spoilers. So first up, a non-Booker book, and that is Monumenta by Lara Haworth. And this is just a short little book, about 120 pages or thereabouts. And it's quite a spare and sort of chilling little story, I think, in a few ways. It's quite clever, I think, in what it does. The core idea is we have a young woman called Olga whose house is about to be sort of requisitioned. And what then sort of follows from that is a sweeping story that looks at sort of politics and history and various other things, because essentially this movement of the house spawns various other conversations about how you honour history and remember history. So hence the title Monumenta. There's a bit of a nod to that. And the first chapter of this book opens with this idea of what kind of horrible thing is being commemorated here. What genocide are we talking about in terms of this, kind of recognising history? Which I think gives you a bit of a sense for what's going on in this book. It's sort of set particularly around a lot of sort of sections in Belgrade, where the characters go to sort of basically unearth old family history and sort of try to understand themselves a bit more. But in the midst of it, you've kind of got this little family drama that that kind of opens up. And so I think it's really quite special the way this book uses that kind of hook, that kind of angle, to give a broader sort of sense of sort of both sort of family history, but also sort of Serbian history and various other things within it. It's a really powerful little book for its size. Next up, another Booker book, but not from 2024. This is The Secret River by Kate Grenville. So I'm still, foolishly proceeding with my project to read the old shortlisted books from the Booker. And here is sort of one from, I think, 2006, if I remember correctly. And Kate Grenville, who has sort of gone on to, well, I mean, I said gone on to, like this was the beginning of her career, but you know what I mean, has had sort of a lot of success with other things, had a book in this year's Women's Prize shortlist. She's sort of a very celebrated author, and The Secret River, in many ways, does similar things to Restless Dolly Maunder, the book that she was shortlisted for the Women's Prize with this year, in the sense of taking a personal family history and applying it to a wider kind of context. So we get a young man who is basically the kind of an origin part of her family, a man called William Thornhill, and he is essentially moved to New South Wales and transported, and we basically get his history. And this, in many ways, then is Kate Grenville's own personal family story of how, she and her wider family came to be in Australia and all of these other things. So it kind of takes that as a starting point and does some really clever things, I think, with it. Particularly just the sort of very human story of what it might be like to, the sort of imagining of what it might be like to find yourself suddenly transported halfway across the world and kind of starting this new life. So I think, yeah, a really interesting book. Next up, All Fours by Miranda July. And this I thought was just a really fun and thoughtful book. So the idea is we have a woman in her mid-40s. She is a semi-successful artist. It's sort of joked at several times throughout the book that she constantly is humbled by the fact that she occasionally is, really celebrated, and then occasionally people are like, sorry, who are you? So she is this sort of semi-famous artist, and one day she basically goes to go on a trip and just never quite makes the rest of the trip. She stops basically about an hour away from where she lives, but she tells everybody else that she's still on her trip. So she is there hanging out very close to where her husband and children are. And at first, this book sort of feels more like a kind of slightly, not say madcap adventure, but she sort of does all these slightly wild things. Like she spends like $20,000 doing up a motel room to sort of make it this big sort of fancy suite and project and whatever. And she sort of starts taking lovers, and it just, this whole sort of thing spins out of it. But then you realize you're still only about halfway through the book and she's about to return home. So you sort of start to think, well, more is going to happen here, right? And what then does follow is this sort of slightly wild set of relationships and other things that kind of go on within it. She has this sort of wild life that is her trying to some degree, find out who she is again, find a sense of purpose, find a sense of meaning in her identity again, both as a woman and as an artist, but also in terms of her relationships with others, what she can be when she isn't sort of constrained to the relationships that she's already got, or when when she's free of having certain kind of routines, for example, about getting children ready. And there's a really beautiful passage in this book, and this doesn't spoil anything, but when she's about to return home and she suddenly has this terror of the idea of just folding straight back into routines as before, making the kids lunches and doing this thing and making sure this thing is tidy and making sure this person's been contacted. And, it kind of both speaks to the kind of the emotional load that is often put on women, the mental load, sorry, that is often put on women for sort of the household tasks and sort of particularly things around sort of child rearing. But also this kind of idea that she can escape it in patches, but there's always the kind of drudgery of home returning to her. And that hit me in an oddly personal way this week, because although I'm not a mother raising children and sort of running away from them, this week I've had the week off, and I very much pushed lots of the responsibilities that I'd normally be a bit more on top of really to the side. That email, I can come back to it in a couple of days, that kind of thing, or that can be a tomorrow problem. And there is something about that fear of drudgery that I think was so well captured in this book, this kind of fear of, well, once I start the machine back up, it's just going to keep whirring, and that's my life, and then I'm on that treadmill. And I thought there was something so poignant in how she was able to distill that into this character's just fear about making sandwiches or, packing bags or whatever else. It gets particularly wild, this book, towards the end, without spoiling anything. But I think it's really both fun, but also just really touching and poignant. And I think it's just an exceptionally observed novel. And keeping with the sort of slightly lighter sort of reading in some ways from this week, it's worth noting, like I was saying with All Fours by Miranda July, my brain has been pretty sleepy this week. I think I've really needed to have a week off. So I had this big pile of books that I brought with me, really thinking I was going to read them. Did that happen? No, not really. But a lot of audiobooks, including this one here, William Hussey with Killing Jericho, which is on the Polari long list, which is sort of how I came to hear about it. But I've just been really enjoying this book. And this is a sort of crime novel featuring this sort of central character who is sort of fairly unique in kind of crime stories, I suppose, for being a detective who is from the traveller community. And the kind of the plot actually takes advantage of some of that kind of character, the kind of uniqueness of that character for him. So he is somebody who sort of grows up around sort of situations that have made him incredibly observant, and have meant that he, although many of the people around him distrust his choice of profession, he has this sort of ability to almost understand both sides, right? To kind of understand the sort of police side of things and understand sort of the needs of the traveller community. But this is a sort of fun romp of a crime book that really looks into various things that are happening and the kinds of I basically very rarely read crime, almost never actually. Every time I have, I've just remembered just how joyous it can be to read something like this. Just to have a book where it's very much just about plot and excitement and trying to guess what's happening next. I also realise I do not have the muscles for crime novels yet, in the sense of actually trying to work out what's happening. I'm just sort of like, great, some things are happening. That's a clue. Whereas I think my local bookshop has a crime reading club, and it's always really interesting seeing the group chat, even though I'm not part of the club, just to see people being like, "Oh, I thought I had it, and then I was wrong." I'm not in the same sort of spate of reading sort of reading space as them, but really interesting nonetheless. And last but not least, two Booker books. Apologies, by the way, if you can hear, I think someone's doing something in the garden just next door. So if you can hear random noise in the background, that's that. Hopefully you can't. But the books I've been reading from the Booker long list have been two interesting ones. So first up, Headshot by Rita Bullwinkel, which I really loved. I sort of thought this was an incredibly pacey and tight, well-crafted narrative. It focuses on 8 girls who are in a sort of a junior boxing tournament in the US, and they their sort of little snapshots into their lives, and kind of almost zooming forward as well and seeing what their lives will look like years down the line. You know, there's one young girl, for example, where we're told, you know, that she's going to be an old woman who can't open her fridge because of the kind of injury sustained from boxing, and you know what that does to your hands. We've got somebody else who sort of, you know, doesn't really think at all about boxing anymore in the future, and all of these sorts of things. I just think it's really cleverly done and really well paced. And last but not least, the other Booker book, Yael van Wouden's book, The Safekeep. And this is, I had mixed feelings about this book, but largely enjoyed it. It's a book that essentially largely focuses on a young girl, Isabel, I think, if I remember her name correctly, who is this sort of complicated, spiky figure. You know, not very many people sort of like her or find it easy to get on with her in some ways. And there's a lot in there about family dynamics and all these various things. But over the course of the book, we start to see how various shadows of history in the past get caught up in everything. So there's a sort of spectre of World War II kind of haunting this novel. And particularly this kind of comes to the fore a bit later when we sort of realise a little bit more about her family and the kind of Jewish history of her family, and the kinds of what that looks like for the Netherlands at that time as well. And so lots of things kind of going on in the background of this novel. But the sort of, there's sort of almost 3 sections, I think, of the book, and really loved the first section, got a little bit lost in the second, and sort of wasn't quite sure what was happening by the third. May also be on me as a reader, but I struggled with it a little bit. But overall, I still think I see why it was long listed. I see why people love it as well. It's just something didn't quite connect for me around the middle of the book. Anyway, that happens. But I've been Bob Booker, talking about the books I've been reading this week. I hope you are having a very good week, and I shall speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.